Around 10 a.m. on January 24, 2015, the Higashisumiyoshi police station in Osaka received an emergency call reporting an unusual incident. The caller was a colleague of Shirata Hikaru, a healthcare welfare worker at the local cancer treatment center. They reported that Hikaru had not arrived at work on time, which was completely out of character for her. Hikaru was well known at her workplace as a serious, responsible person deeply dedicated to her profession. Not only was she rarely late, but she typically arrived nearly 45 minutes early to prepare documents, coordinate shift handovers, and assist patients as soon as possible. For this reason, her sudden loss of contact and failure to appear immediately alarmed her colleagues, who understood that Hikaru was not the type of person to be casual or absent without reason. Filled with mounting concern, a group of colleagues went to her apartment to check on the situation. They knocked repeatedly and called her name multiple times, but the door remained silent with no response from inside. Their sense of unease grew stronger as every reasonable explanation was gradually eliminated. Finally, fearing something serious had happened, they were forced to call the police. After receiving the report, 2 officers from the Higashisumiyoshi station immediately headed to the apartment complex where Shirata Hikaru lived. A tense atmosphere hung over the entire journey, as they understood that someone as dedicated and disciplined as Hikaru would never disappear inexplicably like this unless something abnormal had occurred. Upon arrival, law enforcement coordinated with the building manager to open the apartment door. As soon as the door swung open, a chilling scene appeared before their eyes. The space inside was suffocatingly silent, as if time had stopped long ago. In the bathroom, Shirata Hikaru was discovered lying face down in the bathtub, her clothes still intact, her body motionless, having been lifeless for some time. Police quickly conducted a preliminary examination. On Hikaru's neck, they observed a deep, elongated, and distinct ligature mark, indicating that the victim had been subjected to strong force around her neck before death. Based on the width and structure of the mark, investigators preliminarily surmised that the murder weapon was most likely a belt. What surprised investigators even more was that inside the apartment's microwave, they discovered a cell phone that had been burned. This action was almost certainly intentional on the killer's part. Burning a phone in a microwave is a thorough way to destroy data, making information recovery virtually impossible. Clearly, the perpetrator was not only ruthlessly violent, but had also calculated carefully to erase all traces related to themselves. However, aside from the destroyed phone, the scene showed no signs of struggle, no evidence of ransacking, no items in disarray, and no murder weapon was found. Everything was too clean, too neat, as if the killer had prepared in advance and entered and exited the room in a completely composed state, leaving behind a nearly flawless surface for investigators. Faced with a scene poor in clues, the Osaka prefectural police immediately shifted direction. They collected and reviewed the building's surveillance camera system, while simultaneously launching a comprehensive investigation into all of Shirata Hikaru's personal relationships, work connections, and recent social interactions. After extracting data from the surveillance system, police discovered an extremely crucial detail. Around 7:45 a.m. on the morning of the incident, cameras captured footage of a tall man wearing a black hooded cap and white face mask, quietly entering the building where Shirata Hikaru lived. This person took the elevator directly up to the apartment area, then remained there for nearly an hour. More notably, when leaving, he had changed his clothing, from a black jacket to a brown jacket, as if deliberately creating 2 different appearances to mislead cameras and witnesses. This behavior immediately caught the investigative team's attention. A person who arrived early in the morning, stayed exactly during the time frame of the victim's death, and carefully changed clothes before leaving. This could not be an ordinary visit. From here, police began narrowing down Shirata Hikaru's personal relationships. After only a short time cross-referencing data, the first and most suspicious name emerged: Mizuchi Takashi, 26 years old. What shocked both public opinion and the investigative force was the suspect's identity. Mizuchi Takashi was not a vagrant, not a criminal with a record, but rather an on-duty patrol sergeant at the Abeno police station. That very evening, Mizuchi was summoned for questioning. Although he tried to appear calm and cooperative, the contradictions in his attitude and statements made police increasingly vigilant. By the next day, January 25th, an arrest warrant was officially executed. Facing investigators, Mizuchi adamantly denied any involvement, insisting he was merely the victim of a misunderstanding. However, those words quickly collapsed. During an internal search, police discovered a belt, suspected to be the weapon used to strangle the victim, discarded in a trash can at the Abeno police station itself, where Mizuchi worked daily. This clue not only matched the ligature mark on the victim's neck, but was also evidence that the killer had attempted to dispose of evidence in the very place that was safest for him. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Mizuchi's calm mask finally cracked. After many hours of silence and futile evasive attempts, he hung his head and confessed to the crime. Shirata Hikaru was born in 1994 in Nishikawa, a town in Yamagata Prefecture, a peaceful region with mountains and year-round snow. She was the youngest of 3 sisters, always loved and expected great things of by her family. From a young age, Hikaru displayed strength and discipline, qualities forged through years of dedication to volleyball, beginning in 3rd grade. Her talent and effort helped her not only stand out on the team, but excel to the point of representing her school at the National High School Volleyball Championship. However, this seemingly brilliant childhood was soon overshadowed by great loss. At age 14, her grandmother, to whom Hikaru was extremely close, passed away from cancer. The time spent at the hospital, witnessing each of her grandmother's bouts of pain, each desperate attempt to cling to life, was deeply etched into her heart. It was during that period that Hikaru kindled a different dream, quieter but more enduring than sports, to become someone who could help patients and families fighting illness. After graduating high school, she was accepted into Tohoku Fukushi University in Sendai, choosing to major in social welfare. In 2011, when Shirata Hikaru was a college freshman, tragedy struck once again. Her mother was diagnosed with cancer and had to be hospitalized for extended treatment. From then on, Hikaru lived shuttling between Sendai and Yamagata, balancing her studies while seizing every hour, every minute to stay by her mother's side in her painful battle with the terrible disease. But fate did not smile upon her. In May of that year, right after the devastating East Japan earthquake, Hikaru's mother took her last breath. Within just a few short years, the young woman lost the 2 women she loved most in her life, her grandmother and her mother. That pain was enough to make many people collapse, but for Hikaru, it instead became a reason to keep moving forward. She told her father and family that she wanted to work providing emotional support for terminal cancer patients because she deeply understood the feeling of desperation of those standing beside a sickbed unable to do anything more than hold the hand of their loved one. It was during this period, when her spirit was still deeply wounded, that Shirata met Mizuchi Takashi. He was someone she affectionately called by the intimate nickname Mizu-san. When speaking about him, her voice overflowed with hope, a hope that fate had never given her the chance to hold on to before. Shirata happily informed her family that she had a boyfriend who was a police officer, and when she had to move alone to unfamiliar Osaka to begin a new chapter, her relatives felt somewhat reassured, thinking that beside her was a trustworthy man to protect her. They could never have imagined that this very man, the most trusted person, would later become the cruelest shadow in Shirata's life, pulling her into a tragedy with no escape. As for Mizuchi Takashi, he was born in 1988 in Yao City, Osaka Prefecture. From childhood, Takashi grew up in a family with traditions and a reputation in law enforcement. He attended high school affiliated with Kinki University, a prestigious school in the region. After graduating, instead of continuing to university as many expected, Takashi decided to join the Osaka Prefectural Police and quickly donned the uniform respected by society. In outsiders' eyes, this was a career path to be proud of: young, stable, with status, serving in law enforcement. That reputation was further reinforced when Takashi's father and younger brother were also police officers, creating the image of a family that was upright, disciplined, and honorable, one that almost no one could associate with crime. However, fate's irony often doesn't reveal itself through storms that strike suddenly, but hides behind seemingly flawless, perfect facades. Mizuchi Takashi had studied kendo since childhood, with outstanding talent and unwavering will. Through many years of rigorous training, he reached 5th Dan, nearly the highest level an ordinary martial artist could attain. In the eyes of teachers and friends during elementary school, Mizuchi was always a polite, calm boy with a sense of justice, constantly carrying within him the aspiration to protect justice like the father he admired. It was because of that ideal that Mizuchi set his sights early on becoming a police officer. And when he was finally accepted into the Osaka Prefectural Police, thanks to his excellent kendo achievements, he believed he had taken the right path that fate had laid out for him. At that point, no one, not even Mizuchi himself, could have suspected that the future ahead would push him to a completely different boundary. On April 1st, 2013, Mizuchi's career continued to advance. He was promoted to patrol sergeant and temporarily assigned to Sendai Police Station in Miyagi Prefecture, participating in reconstruction support efforts following the 2011 East Japan earthquake disaster. Just a few weeks later, on April 28th, he attended a singles mixer organized by Sendai City, a networking event creating opportunities for people to expand their social connections. And it was at this seemingly ordinary gathering that Mizuchi Takashi met Shirata Hikaru. At that time, Shirata Hikaru was a junior at Tohoku Fukushi University in Sendai, studying social welfare, the field she had always wanted to pursue. Meanwhile, Mizuchi Takashi appeared at the mixer with a striking appearance, 6 feet tall, weighing approximately 196 pounds, with the solid build of a kendo martial artist, a bright face, handsome features, and a confident demeanor. Not just his appearance, but his identity as a police officer dispatched to the disaster area to assist residents made him even more of a focal point. In the context of that event, where most participants were still students or young people struggling to establish their careers, the image of a young, strong, and seemingly responsible police officer like Mizuchi was like a natural halo. Within a short time, he quickly attracted attention. Quite a few young women cast curious, admiring glances at Mizuchi. However, amid that bustling crowd that day, Mizuchi's gaze settled on Shirata Hikaru, a young woman with pure beauty, calm composure, and a demeanor different from those around her. From that very moment, he continuously sought opportunities to start conversations, proactively approached her, and tried to make an impression. He asked questions, smiled, chatted, and deliberately appeared near Shirata more than others. However, contrary to Mizuchi's enthusiasm, Shirata was initially not won over at all. In her eyes, his overly proactive approach created a feeling of superficiality and showiness. She sensed in Mizuchi a type of man too accustomed to receiving attention from women, which had formed an attitude of somewhat excessive confidence, sometimes lacking subtlety in his behavior. That intense attention made Shirata uncomfortable, even somewhat wary and put off. Recognizing Shirata's cautious attitude, Mizuchi Takashi seemed to understand that his initial impetuousness only made her more distant. From then on, he proactively changed his approach, more patient, calmer, and more sincere in every word, every message. The two began exchanging contact information on social media, chatting more after that mixer. Not stopping at polite greetings, Mizuchi proactively asked to meet Shirata several more times. And during those private meetings, where there were no eyes from the crowd, no showy atmosphere of the event, Shirata began to see a different person in him. Instead of the somewhat ostentatious exterior, Mizuchi appeared thoughtful, gentle, and considerate, sometimes even someone who knew how to listen and show concern at the right time. It was precisely the contrast between his somewhat overconfident exterior appearance and those quiet, kind moments when it was just the two of them that gradually dismantled the defensive layer in Shirata's heart. She began to wonder if she had judged him too hastily. Gradually, wariness turned into acceptance. Then from acceptance, a fragile but genuine affection kindled. By that point, Shirata believed that Mizuchi was not a bad person, and perhaps he was someone who could accompany her on the path ahead. Finally, after several meetings and conversations, the two officially entered into a romantic relationship. However, those sweet months lasted only about half a year. While Shirata was still immersed in the happiness of a new romance, she had absolutely no idea that back in Osaka, Mizuchi already had a fiancé, and the two were even in the midst of preparing for their wedding. For Shirata, this relationship was hope, an emotional anchor after so much loss. But for Mizuchi, this was just a temporary fling during his time working in Sendai. To put it more brutally, Shirata was not his love, but merely a tool to satisfy his personal emotions and desires. In complete contrast to Mizuchi's increasingly obvious coldness, Shirata Hikaru poured her whole heart into this relationship. She had never once doubted his sincerity. In fact, in Shirata's mind, Mizuchi was still the mature, strong, and reliable man she could depend on. Even though over time their dates became increasingly infrequent, and even the dates planned in advance were often canceled by Mizuchi at the last minute, Shirata remained patiently waiting. Each time she received a perfunctory apology from Mizuchi, she convinced herself that he was just busy with police work, that someday things would get better and their love would return to how it was in the beginning. For Shirata, this wasn't just affection. It was the only hope she clung to amid a life that had lost too many loved ones. To the point that every time she called home to Yamagata, she would still joyfully tell her family that she had a boyfriend who was a police officer, her voice full of pride and happiness. In April 2014, when the assignment in Miyagi Prefecture ended, Mizuchi Takashi was transferred back to Abeno, Osaka, to continue his work. Coincidentally, Shirata Hikaru was also approaching an important turning point in her life. Since childhood, she had been familiar with hospitals, familiar with the smell of disinfectant, familiar with holding her grandmother's and mother's hands during their final months battling cancer. It was precisely that experience filled with loss that had made Shirata determined early on to become a social welfare worker so she could help cancer patients and their families get through their most desperate times. However, during this period of preparing for her future, Mizuchi's increasingly obvious coldness remained a smoldering torment in Shirata's heart. She was frequently sad, her spirits flagging, sometimes even having difficulty concentrating on her studies. Even so, through willpower and determination, she still gritted her teeth and persevered, studied diligently, and finally passed the medical welfare worker certification exam, opening the career path she had always dreamed of. In May 2014, Shirata received notification that she had been hired at a cancer treatment center in Higashisumiyoshi Ward, Osaka. With a heart full of hope, she moved alone to Osaka, believing that this would be the beginning of both her career and her love life. Higashisumiyoshi Ward, where Shirata began her new job, was right next to Abeno, where Mizuchi worked. Just a short walk away, the two could meet at any time. For Shirata, this seemed like a beautiful arrangement of fate, a favorable job, the man she loved very close by, everything seemingly opening up to a warm beginning. But reality quickly threw cold water on her. Throughout the 2 months after moving to Osaka, despite being within arm's reach, she still hadn't seen Mizuchi even once. Unanswered calls, perfunctory text replies, and constantly avoided plans made Shirata gradually fall into a feeling of abandonment. Each time she tried to suggest meeting, Mizuchi always found every excuse to avoid her. Once, when Shirata asked Mizuchi for his home address so she could conveniently visit, he only vaguely replied that he was living with his parents, then immediately closed off the conversation, refusing to reveal further details. Shirata didn't know that behind that evasiveness was the biggest secret Mizuchi was hiding. He was living with his fiancée in Kadoma City. Therefore, despite the very close geographical distance, the distance in their relationship grew increasingly far, because Mizuchi could not and would never dare let Shirata step into his real life. One night in June 2014, after drinking and chatting with senior colleagues until late, Mizuchi missed the last train. While struggling to find a way home, he suddenly had a different idea. Go to Shirata's apartment. Late at night, a long distance, and tipsy. But for Shirata, this was one of the rare moments when he proactively came to her. When the doorbell rang, Shirata rushed to open it. The moment she saw the man she loved standing in front of her small apartment door, Shirata was happy to the point of nearly bursting into tears. She felt as if fate had finally smiled, giving her a signal that this love still had hope. But then, that was just a rare moment, not the return of a man devoted to her. Those visits were only occasional, sudden, never becoming routine. Shirata cherished every meager second, while Mizuchi only considered it a temporary stop on the way back to his real life. Just 2 months later, in August 2014, Mizuchi held a grand wedding with his fiancée. All his relatives, friends, and colleagues knew. Only Shirata didn't. She only vaguely realized that Mizuchi's attitude toward her seemed increasingly cold. That indifferent feeling filled her heart with unease. In October 2014, after many days of internal struggle, Shirata finally gathered enough courage to say goodbye for the first time. She believed this was the most dignified way to withdraw for both of them, still preserving dignity, still leaving behind a few good memories, before everything fell into an irreparable abyss. In Shirata's heart, that decision was not easy at all, but she understood that continuing to prolong a relationship with no warmth left would only hurt her heart more. However, Mizuchi's reaction was completely beyond her expectations. He didn't try to hold on, didn't explain, didn't apologize. On the contrary, he coldly, emotionlessly looked straight at Shirata and uttered just a few icy words. "Don't you like me? You fundamentally can't leave me." Just 2 sentences, but for Shirata, it was like a knife stabbing straight into her heart. Not an apology, not cherishing her. And more painfully, deep in Shirata's heart, she realized she truly wasn't strong enough to leave him. In that moment, all the determination she had worked so hard to build up crumbled. As a result, Shirata abandoned the intention to break up, and once again, accepted staying in the unbalanced relationship. However, nothing changed. Mizuchi remained cold, indifferent, and distant, even sometimes appearing annoyed and impatient whenever Shirata tried to close the distance between them. The feeling of being pushed away made her feel trapped in an inescapable void. Refusing to give up, Shirata 2 more times gathered all her courage to propose breaking up. But each time, Mizuchi skillfully declined, clinging to vague emotional reasons. Those ambiguous promises became invisible threads binding Shirata's heart tightly, causing a relationship that should have ended to continue dragging on in exhaustion, pain, and torment. She fell into the vicious cycle of a toxic love. Each passing day, Shirata had to struggle with countless contradictions. Love, hate, hope, despair, wanting to move on, but returning. Her inner self was gradually worn down until she could hardly distinguish right from wrong anymore. Then entering the new year of 2015, an unexpected event occurred. Mizuchi proactively invited Shirata to meet. The date took place at a lively izakaya, and that day one of Mizuchi's colleagues even came along. For Shirata, this seemed like an incredibly significant signal. She believed that if he was willing to bring her out to meet friends, then perhaps the relationship had taken a positive step forward. In the bustling atmosphere of the izakaya, Shirata chatted cheerfully, even exchanging contact information with Mizuchi's colleague. In that moment, her heart for the first time in many months rekindled hope. She thought that perhaps Mizuchi had changed, that the cold days had passed, that the light of happiness she had once lost was gradually returning. However, just a few days later, a horrifying shock completely shattered all the fragile hopes Shirata had just kindled. That day, while reviewing messages on social media from a colleague she had met at the drinking party, Shirata accidentally clicked on a photo file that, the moment she saw it, made her body instantly freeze. On the screen was Mizuchi Takashi, the man she loved deeply, wearing a neat wedding suit, his face radiant, his arm around the waist of a bride in a wedding dress. Both were smiling happily. Behind them was an elegant ceremonial hall space, with candles, flowers, wedding gifts, and warm yellow lighting. Everything beautiful, magnificent, sacred. But in Shirata's eyes, that scene was like a knife plunged straight into her heart. The joy of that wedding didn't just display the happiness of a couple, it also mocked, ridiculed, and crushed her love. Shirata could hardly believe her own eyes. That photo wasn't just an ordinary moment, but Mizuchi's actual wedding photo. Only in that instant did the truth hit her like a hammer blow straight to her mind. While Shirata was immersed in illusions of love and the future, the man in whom she had placed complete trust had grandly walked down the aisle with another woman. It turned out that during the days she waited for messages, waited for a date, Mizuchi was holding his own wedding ceremony. Mizuchi could hide it from her, could construct perfect lies, even instruct the organizers not to post photos online, but he couldn't control everything, especially casual photos shared by guests, and it was precisely that which exposed the entire cruel truth. Finally, all the broken pieces of memory suddenly fell into place before Shirata's eyes. Why on every birthday, every Christmas, every occasion when a boyfriend should be by her side, did Mizuchi disappear with a series of excuses? Now she understood. All the promises, all the silence, all the disappearances shared one bitter answer. He had never belonged to her. The feeling of betrayal made Shirata's heart feel torn apart. Within her surged a cruel mixture of rage, collapse, humiliation, and despair. Unable to endure any longer, Shirata poured out her pain on social media, writing lines full of stifled resentment and veiled accusations. Perceptive people could immediately understand what had happened. Shortly after, the story reached Mizuchi's ears. However, what Shirata received in return wasn't remorse or even a minimal apology. Mizuchi even responded with a joking tone, as if everything was trivial, as if the feelings she had for him weren't worth bothering about. That indifference not only hurt her, but callously diminished her worth. But the biggest shock hadn't stopped yet. In the process of investigating, Shirata learned the truth was even more cruel. Mizuchi hadn't only deceived her. Before and after his marriage, he simultaneously maintained ambiguous relationships with 7 women, and Shirata was just one of them. On January 21st, in extreme outrage, Shirata no longer remained silent. She straightforwardly posted on social media a line full of anger. "I will make you face society's punishment." This wasn't just a warning. It was the first declaration of war from a woman who had once endured, once been patient, once viewed Mizuchi as her entire sky. From someone emotionally manipulated like a puppet, Shirata for the first time showed strong resistance. And from that moment, the balance between manipulator and victim began to reverse. That status update made Mizuchi begin to fear. He couldn't accept that Shirata, someone he always thought would forever be in his grasp, now dared to oppose him. His arrogance wouldn't allow that to exist, and anxiety began to kindle. At 7:45 a.m. on January 24th, Mizuchi appeared at the door of Shirata Hikaru's apartment. He came with the purpose of a peaceful ending through a breakup, hoping to extinguish the spreading fire. But everything was too late. In the small room, the conversation quickly turned into an angry confrontation. Shirata questioned Mizuchi. "Why did you deceive my feelings? Why did you destroy my life with lies?" She also threatened to tell Mizuchi's wife and the police the entire truth, to drag him into the light, to force him to pay for what he had done. Those words hit precisely Mizuchi's weakness and greatest fear: the collapse of honor, a destroyed career, and the exposure of his model police officer image. In that moment, his reason was completely suffocated by panic, pride, and pathological ego. In a fit of rage, Mizuchi lunged forward, grabbed a belt, and tightened it around Shirata Hikaru's neck. Despite her struggling, despite her weak pleas, he didn't stop. In that moment, he chose the most extreme way to end this relationship. After completing the crime, Mizuchi continued to perform a series of actions to erase all traces. He put Shirata Hikaru's phone in the microwave, completely destroying contact data, something that could become evidence against him. Not stopping there, to avoid leaving footprints in the apartment, Mizuchi even wore specialized police-style shoe covers, exactly like those used during crime scene investigations. That calculation showed he not only killed in a fit of rage, but also had strong awareness of concealing the crime. After cleaning up everything, around 9:30 a.m., Mizuchi calmly returned to Abeno, then casually participated in a kendo training session as if nothing had happened. Before entering the training room, he quietly threw the murder weapon belt into a trash can at his workplace, believing that the most dangerous place is the safest place. On February 5th, Shirata Hikaru's family came from Yamagata to Osaka to collect her belongings. While still unable to overcome their grief, they unexpectedly received a call from Osaka police, informing them that the chief of Abeno Station wanted to meet. The meeting was arranged at Higashisumiyoshi Station, with the station chief and deputy chief present on the police side, along with Shirata's father and older sister. What was strange was that the meeting time was set for 10 p.m., which seemed unreasonable. During the meeting, the Abeno Station chief opened with a statement that shocked the family. Why would a guy like Mizuchi, at the peak of happiness after getting married, get caught up in this trouble? The word trouble was like cold water thrown directly onto the family's unhealed pain. Immediately, Shirata's father angrily questioned, how could a cold-blooded murder committed by his own subordinate be referred to with such a dismissive phrase? A life had been lost, a family permanently shattered, and what they received was merely a perfunctory, insensitive, and disrespectful attitude. Not stopping there, while explaining, the station chief inadvertently mentioned a superior using internal terminology that should never be used in front of outsiders. That detail further raised Shirata's father's suspicions that the police were more concerned about the system, about saving face, than about human life. He controlled his grief and responded with indignation. I thought the first people who should apologize to me would be Mizuchi's parents. I didn't expect the director of a company like yours to say such things. He compared the station chief to a corporate director who placed interests above morality, a bitterly sarcastic remark reflecting the collapse of trust in the police force. In that very moment, he understood that the organization he had once believed was upright, fair, and humane was actually far removed from the image the public had imagined. When the station chief tried to justify himself, saying that immediately after Mizuchi's arrest, he had wanted to meet the victim's family, but the investigation department didn't allow it, Shirata's father immediately interrupted. He looked straight at the head of Abeno police station and said with restrained fury, "Don't say things like that. Do you think I'll accept that excuse? As the person responsible, you should say, as station chief, I should have come to apologize directly. That's the attitude a superior should have." Those words were like a slap in the face to the station chief's evasiveness and avoidance of responsibility. But what made the family even more outraged was what followed. When Shirata's older sister spoke up and asked, "If we hadn't come to Osaka this time, when were you planning to meet my family?" The station chief was silent for a few seconds, then weakly replied, "I didn't think about it." Just 4 short words, but enough to completely demolish the image a police leader should have. That tone, that attitude, those words were not only irresponsible, but revealed something even colder. It seemed he viewed himself as the one being implicated, rather than the victim's family being the ones enduring ultimate pain. That attitude caused Shirata's family to completely lose faith, and public opinion later also erupted. Because as a police station chief, those flippant words and cowardly behavior not only insulted the deceased, but also made people doubt his minimal moral character. That such a person was appointed to a leadership position made many citizens question the system. On February 13th, the Osaka Prefectural Police officially announced the decision to dismiss Mizuchi Takashi from the force. Public opinion at this time remained extremely outraged, waiting for a trial that could bring justice for Shirata Hikaru. On September 15th, 2015, Mizuchi's trial officially opened at Osaka District Court. Before the court, Mizuchi admitted to all charges. Therefore, the focus of the trial no longer lay in determining guilt, but shifted to the question, what sentence should this killer pay? At court, Mizuchi testified that he killed Shirata because he was provoked and lost control, as Shirata threatened to publicly expose their relationship to his wife and the police force. He described the killing as an impulsive moment, driven by fear and anger. But the prosecution did not accept that weak justification. The prosecutor pointed out before the court that Mizuchi not only deceived Shirata, but before and after his marriage, he also maintained ambiguous relationships with many other women. Shirata was just one of the victims exploited emotionally. The prosecution asserted that what Mizuchi feared wasn't losing control, but losing everything he wanted to keep: his reputation, his marriage, his image as a model police officer, and his own future in the force. In other words, he killed not because he was cornered, but because he wanted to silence the victim, to protect himself. Mizuchi also admitted frankly before the court that Shirata Hikaru had never been his love. In his eyes, Shirata was just a casual relationship, enjoyable when present, disposable when boring. He even believed that if he just let time pass, this relationship would end on its own, without any responsibility or decisive action needed from him. Regarding the motive for the crime, Mizuchi continued to claim that he had no premeditated plan to kill, that this was only the consequence of an impulsive argument, a mistake made in a split second when he lost control. However, the prosecution immediately refuted this argument. The prosecutor pointed out that before the incident occurred, Mizuchi had brought a belt with him, and that was precisely the weapon he used to murder Shirata. This detail could not be seen as coincidence, but as a sign of preparation. The prosecution argued he knew full well that a belt was a type of weapon difficult to trace, and it minimized direct evidence left at the scene. He placed the body in the bathtub in an attempt to raise the rectal temperature to interfere with forensic ability to estimate time of death. He put Shirata Hikaru's phone in the microwave and burned it, erasing all call records and messages. He knew the building hallway had surveillance cameras, so when committing the crime, he wore a mask to cover his face, and after the murder changed clothes, trying to conceal the truth. This series of actions all showed his calm and cold calculation. At the trial session on October 1st, the case entered the sentencing phase. The prosecution requested a sentence of 20 years in prison for Mizuchi Takashi. They emphasized that when killing, Mizuchi used the belt without hesitation to strangle Shirata Hikaru. Despite her desperate struggling and verbal pleas, he didn't stop. This fully demonstrated his strong intent to kill as well as his cruel, cold nature. However, the defense attorney still insisted this case was not premeditated murder, but a crime of passion. They argued that after the incident, Mizuchi had been dismissed from public service and lost his career, which was already an enormous punishment. Therefore, they requested the judge consider leniency and sentence him to 14 years in prison. At the end of the trial, Mizuchi stood up, bowed deeply before Shirata Hikaru's family, and said in a trembling voice, "I took Miss Hikaru's life. I brought everyone irreparable pain. I am deeply sorry." On October 6th, Osaka District Court issued its final verdict, convicting Mizuchi Takashi of intentional murder and sentencing him to 18 years in prison. Mizuchi did not appeal, so the sentence was finalized. Love, if misplaced, can become a knife turned back against the very heart that gave it. Shirata Hikaru loved with all the sincerity, loyalty, and desire for happiness of a woman who had endured too much loss in life. But that love, instead of being cherished, was exploited, betrayed, and led her to a cruel end. This shocking case finally came to a close. However, the wounds and pain in the victims' families' hearts will never be soothed. And that is today's case. Thank you for following along, and see you in the next videos.